Welcome to the Federal Aviation Administration's virtual public workshop for the draft environmental assessment of the proposed RNAV GPS approach procedure at Boston Logan International Airport. I'm Colleen D'Alessandro, Regional Administrator for the FAA's New England region. Joining me today are several members of the team who worked on the draft environmental assessment. They'll assist me in answering your questions. I'll start by introducing Veranda Johnson. Veranda is our Environmental Protection Specialist for the FAA.
Good evening, everyone.
Next, we have Rusty Baird. Rusty is the Support Manager at the Boston Terminal Radar Approach Control, or TRACON, one of the air traffic control facilities that will direct flights on the proposed procedure.
Thank you, Colleen. Good evening, everyone.
Next, we have Donovan Johnson. Donovan is the technical project lead with Roverless, the company that conducted the environmental assessment.
Good evening, everybody.
We have Steve Getzinger. Steve is the deputy project manager with Environmental Science Associates, a subcontractor that worked on the environmental assessment with Roverless.
Good evening, Colleen. Good to be here.
And lastly, we have Doug Willey. Doug is an Airbus A320 captain with a major US airline representing the Airline Pilots Association International, or ALPA. Captain Willey has been flying professionally for over 20 years and flies into Boston frequently. He'll answer questions from a pilot's perspective.
Good evening, everyone. Great to be here.
This is the second of two virtual workshops that we're holding to share information and answer your questions about the draft environmental assessment of the proposed new approach procedure. We're recording the workshop and we'll post this at FAABostonWorkshops.com and on the FAA YouTube page so residents who are unable to participate in the workshops can view them later. Questions and comments made during the workshops will not be considered as official comments on the draft environmental assessment. We will not document them for the legal record. To make an official comment, please go to FAABostonWorkshops.com to make an online comment. Email a comment to FAABostonWorkshops@ESASSOC.com or mail it to the address on the screen. The comment period closes on November 20th. Please note, if you include your address, phone number, email address, or other personal identifying information in your comment, it may be made available publicly. That includes questions submitted at this workshop or comments made through the official methods, online, email, or US mail. You can ask us in your comment to withhold personal information from public disclosure. However, we can't guarantee that we'll be able to do so. During the workshop, you may submit questions by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. A window will open and you may enter your question. People who are watching the workshop on the FAA's YouTube or Facebook pages may enter questions in the chat areas or comment boxes. If you're listening on the phone, you can text us a question at 617-237-0734. And let me repeat that number, 617-237-0734. We'll answer as many questions as time allows that pertain to the environmental assessment. Questions that are repetitive may not be answered. And we're also unable to answer questions about any other topic during this workshop. Thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, please use the Q&A icon to submit questions. You may submit questions at any time. And we'll now begin with just a short video that will summarize the NEPA process, the proposed project, the EA findings, and give a walkthrough of the noise visualization tool.
The FAA is proposing a new instrument approach procedure to runway 4 left at Boston Logan International Airport. This new procedure will enhance safety for approaching aircraft and will enable the airport to operate more efficiently under poor weather conditions. Implementation of a new procedure is a federal action with the potential to cause environmental impacts, so the FAA must comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, to move forward with the project. NEPA requires federal agencies to consider the potential environmental impacts by conducting environmental review, give agencies information to help them make informed decisions. For certain actions, require public disclosure of environmental impacts. The FAA completed preliminary technical and environmental review of the procedure in March 2016, which determined that an environmental assessment and EA was required. The EA studied whether the proposed new procedure has the potential to result in significant environmental effects. We completed the draft EA in September 2020, and it now is the public review and comment period. The draft EA summarizes the purpose and need of the project, assesses the alternatives considered to meet the purpose and need, identifies the environmental categories most likely to be affected, and documents potential environmental impacts across these categories. The comment period ends on November 20th, 2020. The FAA will review and address all comments in the final EA before deciding whether to move forward with the proposed procedure. Public comments are an integral part to the environmental review process. The FAA opened a 60-day public comment period when it published the draft EA. The comment period began on September 21st and ends on November 20th, 2020. We encourage you to submit comments through the comments page on the project website, emailing your comment to the email address listed, or mailing your comment to the address listed. We will review all comments we receive during the comment period, and we will respond to the comments in the final environmental assessment. Question, comments, and answers submitted discussed during the public workshop will not be considered as formal public comment on the environmental assessment and will not be documented as part of the environmental assessment. If you would like your question, comment to be included as part of the environmental assessment, please submit your comments in writing as I outlined for it to be officially addressed in the EA. Please watch the following animation that describes the proposed action, and I'll return after the video to summarize the findings of the EA.
Boston Logan International Airport is the primary airport serving the Boston metropolitan area. It is owned and operated by the Massachusetts Port Authority, Massport. The airport is located just 1 mile east of downtown Boston in the Mass Turnpike. In 2019, the airport recorded a total of 427,176 takeoffs and landings. It is among the top 20 busiest airports in the nation. The airport has 6 runways with 2 pairs of parallel runways that range from 2,500 to more than 10,000 feet long. The airport can accommodate 120 takeoffs and landings per hour during good weather conditions and 60 takeoffs and landings per hour in poor weather conditions. The draft environmental assessment studied a proposed new path for aircraft to land on runway 4 left at the airport. The proposed new procedure originates southwest of the airport. The proposed new procedure will provide lateral and vertical guidance for aircraft on approach to runway 4 left. It will enable continuous descent to the runway and offer a more predictable, consistent, and stabilized approach path, which improves safety. The proposed new procedure includes 2 charted transitions, Nunzio and Wounds, and 2 uncharted transitions, the Cape area and left downward transitions. We project that 359 flights will use the proposed new procedure each year. For context, in 2019, a total of 6,416 aircraft landed on runway 4 left. These transitions are 2 paths for aircraft to use to reach the final approach path. Aircraft arriving from the south transition into the approach procedure at the charted fix Nunzio, and then follow the charted procedure along the waypoints to runway 4 left. We expect 179 aircraft to use the Nunzio transition each year. Aircraft arriving from the southwest will transition into the approach procedure at Wounds, and then follow the charted procedure along the waypoints to to runway 4 left. We expect 18 aircraft to use the WOUNS transition each year. Aircraft arriving from airports on Cape Cod, the islands, and other points east and southeast will transition into the procedure north of AL and south of Leveron. The approaching aircraft will then follow the charter procedure to runway 4 left. The green tracks are an example of traffic that would use the proposed new procedure. We expect 54 aircraft to use the Cape area transition each year. Aircraft arriving from the west and north will fly to the west of the airport parallel to runway 4 left, before turning to transition into the procedure between Leveron and Mattapan. The orange tracks are an example of traffic that would use the proposed new procedure. We expect 108 aircraft to use the left downward transition each year. The black border defines the General Study Area, or GSA for short. The GSA includes every area where potential environmental impacts might occur from the proposed new procedure. It was defined to encompass the geographic area where an aircraft flight path could be affected up to 10,000 feet above the ground. The GSA for this project encompasses 1,173 square miles across Middlesex, Norfolk, Plymouth, and Suffolk counties. The draft environmental assessment studied and considered all impacts from the proposed new procedure within the GSA.
The potential environmental impacts and estimated use of the procedure was considered for the applicable categories in NEPA. They are fully summarized in the draft environmental assessment. The noise impacts from aircraft activity without the proposed procedure and the noise impacts from aircraft activity, including the proposed procedure, were calculated using the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, or AEDT. AEDT is the FAA's approved model for assessing noise and emissions at civilian airports. The noise impacts were calculated both with and without the proposed procedure for all 27,080 census blocks within the general study area as designated by the United States Census Bureau. When the two sets of noise impacts were compared, there were no significant or reportable noise impacts from the implementation of the proposed procedure. When compared to the no action impacts, the aircraft activity included on the proposed new procedure did not have an appreciable effect on the noise exposure ranges associated with the noise-sensitive communities south of the airport. This is shown in the table summarizing noise exposure by neighborhood. For a more detailed look to the noise level in your neighborhood, please use the noise visualization tool at FAA-BostonWorkshops.com. You can enter your address and see the calculated noise level of the proposed procedure in your neighborhood. Local air quality emissions were calculated for the no action and proposed action alternatives for all pollutants regulated by the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Only carbon monoxide was calculated to increase by just 0.001 short tons per year in the general study area. This increase is far less than the EPA's regulatory limits for carbon monoxide, which is an increase of 100 short tons per year. The increase in greenhouse gas emissions from the proposed procedure is just 0.2 tons of carbon dioxide per year. For context, the annual emissions from the state of Massachusetts are over 66 million metric tons per year. The impact on historic properties must be considered. It must be coordinated and approved by the Massachusetts Historical Commission. Within the general study area, we identified 70,142 properties for potential impacts from the proposed procedure. The analysis showed a maximum increase in the overflights of just 0.54%. All of the identified historic properties already have overflights. The change in noise exposure level was also assessed at each of the historic properties with the maximum DNL change of 0.14 decibel. The draft EA anticipate a finding of no significant impact to historic resources. However, this is a preliminary finding, preliminary pending further consultation with the Historical Commission and other consultant parties. The property identified in Section 4F of the Department of Transportation Act of 1966. Section 4F properties for short are public parks, recreation areas, or wildlife refuge. In accordance with NEPA, Section 4F properties must not be substantially diminished when exposed to the proposed action. A total of 11,803 Section 4F properties were identified within the GSA and reviewed for possible impacts. For all of these Section 4F properties in the general study area, we identified no significant or reportable noise impacts using the NEPA noise impact criteria. When considering all Section 4 properties with a no action noise exposure level of DNL 45 decibels or greater, the maximum change in noise exposure level was 0.17 decibels. The project website includes an interactive map that depicts noise levels in the general study area of the draft environmental assessment. This map shows the model noise levels from the environmental assessment for multiple impact categories. This walkthrough is to help you understand and navigate the multiple sets of data in this interactive map. You can find the interactive map on the project webpage under Noise Visualization. Once you have clicked on Noise Visualization, you will see the interactive map at the center of the page with the layer list to the right on the page. The layer list allows you to turn on and off the layers depicted on the map. The map initially displays layers for the general study area, the proposed new procedure, and noise levels at population centroids. To view information on each layer, click on the arrow next to each layer to see the legend. In the example of noise levels at population centroids, you can see that each dot represents a different model noise level. The noise levels on this map are in DNL, which stands for Day-Night Average Sound Level, and is the standard noise metric used by the FAA. The levels were generated using the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, FAA's software system that is used to model aircraft noise. Now let's see the potential noise level for a specific area. Using the search bar in the top left corner, you can look at the noise levels around a specific landmark. For example, to look at the noise levels around the Milton Public Library, you just need to type in Milton Public Library or the corresponding address and select the correct location that appears. You can see the map has zoomed into the location. The blue dots surrounding the location indicate that Milton Town Hall is in an area where noise levels ranging between 45 and 50 DNL. If we select one of these dots, we can see the noise levels without the proposed new procedure or baseline noise exposure, and with the proposed new procedure or alternative noise exposure. Now let's see what the potential noise are at a Section 4F property. Section 4F is just a NEPA term for public parks or recreation areas. To see potential noise levels to these properties, turn on the appropriate layer in the layer list. I'm going to turn on DOT Act Section 4F properties, noise levels, and turn off noise levels at population centroids. Now I am depicting the 4F properties and their modeled noise levels within the general study area. Now let's see the model noise levels at the Franklin Park Zoo. Using the search bar, type in Franklin Park Zoo. Select the green dot. Here we can see the noise levels at this location are approximately 53.17 DNL without the proposed new procedure and 53.14 DNL with the proposed new procedure, representing a decrease of 0.03 DNL. If we are interested in knowing the noise level at historic and cultural resources, we can follow the same approach as Section 4F properties. I can select the layer I want to see by turning off the Section 4F noise levels layer and turn on the historic and cultural resources noise levels. And search for the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum. After typing the property name, I can select the location represented in pink and see the noise levels at this location. Remember that the baseline noise exposure represents noise levels without the proposed new procedure, and the alternative noise exposure represents noise levels with the proposed new procedure. The difference of the two is the noise change at this location. We encourage everyone to use a noise visualization tool to find out more information about the noise levels in your area. This concludes our review of the EA findings. A more detailed discussion of the findings and additional impact categories can be found in the draft environmental assessment. Before we move into the question and answer portion of this workshop, we want to note again that the questions and answers discussed during the public workshop will not be considered as official comment on the draft EA. Please submit your questions by email, US mail, or the comment form at faabostonworkshops.com to have it formally addressed in the EA.
Thank you for listening to the presentation about the proposed action and the findings of the environmental assessment. And now we'd like to begin the question and answer portion of today's workshop. As a reminder, please use the Q&A icon to submit questions. If you're watching this workshop on YouTube or Facebook, you may enter questions into the comments sections below the streams. If you're listening to this workshop on the phone, you can text us a question at 617-237-0734. As a reminder to everyone, questions and comments made during the workshops will not be considered as official comments on the draft environmental assessment. To make an official comment, please go to faabostonworkshops.com to make an online comment. Email a comment to faabostonworkshops at esassoc.com or mail it to the address on the screen. The comment period closes on November 20th. My fellow panelists and I will start by answering questions already submitted, and then we'll work through the questions to try to address as many as possible. So thanks for listening, and on to the first question. And this one is going to be for Steve. Why was the environmental study prepared? What did the environmental assessment study?
Sure thing, Colleen. So the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, has prepared the Draft Environmental Assessment, or EA, to identify the potential environmental effects associated with a new proposed instrument approach procedure into runway 4 left at Boston Logan International Airport. The RNAV GPS approach for runway 4 left will provide enhanced safety for aircraft approaching the runway and will enable the airport to operate more efficiently under poor weather conditions. And this proposed action is needed because currently there's no instrument approach procedure for runway 4 left. So aircraft arriving lack the vertical and lateral guidance during the approach phase of flight. The draft environmental assessment takes this proposed procedure and summarizes the potential environmental impact of the proposed procedure across different environmental categories. So to try to look at the kind of full breadth of the impact of the procedure. For example, the potential impact on air quality, on local parks, on state parks, and on endangered species by the proposed procedure are all assessed and summarized as part of the environmental document, and then kind of summarized in the environmental document.
Great, thanks. And we can get that document, Steve, on faabostonworkshops.com.
That's correct. It's also available at a couple libraries around the Boston area, around the proposed where the proposed procedure is. But the easiest place to get it would be on the project website, faabostonworkshops.com.
Okay, the next question is for Donovan. And the question is, can you summarize the impact of the proposed procedure on flight counts at the airport?
Sure, thank you, Colleen. So when visibility is low, flights will be able to now land on runway 4 left utilizing the new procedure. And what this will do is help to reduce delays that actually push arrivals later into the day and sometimes late at night. Currently, aircraft can only use runway 4 left when the weather is good. The draft EA projects an additional 359 annual arrivals to runway 4 left, which represents flights that would no longer be canceled or delayed as they are today. For reference with the proposed procedure, there's a shade less than 14,000 annual arrivals into runway 4 left. So we're adding 359 additional arrivals to that. The procedure will allow these flights to land before 10 p.m. It'll decrease late night arrivals as well as the associated noises with those flights. That 359 flights also includes 104 annual flights that today would use runway 4 right, but will no longer need to wait and be delayed to use that in the future and can transition to runway 4 left instead. For reference, without the proposed procedure, there's approximately 63,800 flights arriving in the runway 4 right per year.
Okay, thanks, Donovan. Okay, the next question is for me, and it is, why isn't the FAA holding in-person public meetings for this project like previous environmental studies? So good question. I think we'd all like to be doing things like we used to be able to do them. Unfortunately, we cannot hold in-person workshops at this time because public health officials are advising against large gatherings of people, and they really strongly recommend social distancing. Also, many meeting venues remain closed due to the ongoing concerns about COVID. And this procedure is critical to flight safety at Boston Logan International Airport. So implementing new flight procedures takes time, and we're moving forward with the process so that we can make the procedure available to both pilots and air traffic controllers as soon as possible. In fact, we anticipate reaching many more residents through the online workshops than we would have typically reached in person. And we're confident that we're able to provide the same or even more access to information about the project than we would have been able to provide at in-person meetings. Next question is for Doug, and also perhaps Rusty may want to comment on this one. Does the FAA expect that the 4 left or the 4 right RNAV will be amended to include sidesteps? And maybe you can also describe what is meant by a sidestep.
So Colleen, I'm going to give the first part to Rusty, since it's more about a design issue and some limitations based on air traffic control. And then I'll come in after Rusty if there's any need to do that. But again, this particular question has some specifics that I think Rusty is much more qualified to answer. Rusty?
Sure. Thank you, Doug. So the term sidestep is used to describe an aircraft changing their landing runway from one runway to a parallel runway. And that term is generally used in conversation. However, sidesteps is an instrument maneuver with published minimums on an instrument approach procedure. The maximum allowable distance between runways for this is 1,200 feet. The runways at Boston are 1,500 feet apart. Sidestep minimums are usually lower than circling minimums because of the 1,200 feet distance limit between the runways. During the 27 construction of runway 4 right, procedures were published with sidestep minimums. This required a waiver because the runways are too far apart to publish sidestep minimums. This was necessary because most airlines are not allowed to conduct circling approaches, which is making an instrument approach to one runway and landing on another. When the runway 4 right construction was completed, the procedure or the sidestep maneuver we were using was canceled.
And just to add a little bit to the concept of sidestep, one of the things that we in the air carrier business do from the flight deck is that we make sure that we get stabilized between 1,500 feet and our landing. So we have stabilized approach criteria, which is a safety requirement that almost every airline and operator uses today. Putting a sidestep maneuver low during the approach is more difficult, makes that stabilized approach criteria much more difficult to achieve. And so, and if for some reason we're unable to achieve those, we have to execute a missed approach and come back around for a new landing. So again, this I cannot comment on whether they'll be amended in the future. That's outside my particular expertise or area. But again, the sidestep maneuver is not something we do a lot. We can do it. It's a safe maneuver, but it's something that generally we don't rely upon as a typical everyday event. Hope that's helpful.
And Doug, just to get the better answer to the question, no, we do not intend to amend the procedure to include a sidestep.
Okay, thanks both of you. And I just want to add a little bit. When Rusty was speaking, I know my sound cut out just when he said 2017. So I just want to repeat that piece that during the 2017 construction of runway 4 right, procedures were published with sidestep minimums. So I just want to make sure everybody heard that date. Okay, next question is going to be for Veranda. And the question is, this week, as has routinely been the case, jet aircraft overflying Milton repeatedly registered dB levels of 70 dB and higher on flight after flight, measured from the ground as they passed overhead. Has the FAA conducted any field work to obtain readings of the sound of flights over Milton, Mattapan, and Dorchester as a supplement to its DNL modeled estimates?
Thank you, Colleen. To calculate the impacts of this proposed project, the FAA is required to use noise modeling rather than noise measurement. Noise modeling allows the FAA to estimate noise levels over a wide geographic area, like the general study area. It is also important that FAA considers the impacts over an entire year and not just during a single overflight. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, so basically the answer is no. There was no field work conducted. That's not typically part of our process.
No, we use the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, ADT, to calculate noise.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question is for Rusty. Would an offset with an angle greater than 2 degrees be safe? If so, why wasn't that considered to help those who live between the 4 right and the 4 left straight-in approaches?
Okay, Colleen, thank you. So the FAA does design all procedures to be safe, and there are many different elements that we consider when designing procedures. We start off with the final approach course to the runway. The 2-degree offset on this procedure was determined based on the FAA criteria for simultaneous offset instrument approaches.
Okay, next question. How does this new procedure actually make it more safe to fly in and out of the airport? And that one is definitely going to Doug.
Well, I'm happy to offer some insight into that. So currently, runway 4 left is a visual approach only runway. And this particular procedure means there will now be an instrument approach to that runway. Visual approaches are perfectly safe. We do them all the time and throughout the national airspace. But anytime we can get more information, more data in the flight deck to help us back up the procedures that we do, it's an improvement. So there are many degrees of safety, and we're always looking to improve safety. I know the FAA does that from their perspective in air traffic control, and every operator and airline does the same thing. So by providing an instrument approach procedure, we will give a lateral guidance and vertical guidance expectation in the flight deck. These are extra indications the pilots can use. It allows for very predictable and very repeatable flight paths down to the runway, not only in visual conditions, but also in lower weather conditions. I think that covers it.
Okay, can you just give an example of what you mean by lower weather conditions? Like, I don't know, at my house, it's raining out tonight. Might be an example?
So weather conditions for us involve both visibility so that we can see forward, as well as how high the clouds are and how close to the ground they are. So both of those can come into play. What we call visual conditions is a minimum of 1,000-foot cloud deck above the ground. So it has to be at least 1,000, and the visibility has to be at least 3 miles. That would be anything there or higher would be considered visual meteorological conditions, and we could execute the visual approach in that regard. Anything below that starts to meet what we call instrument conditions and instrument flight rules, and that's when we can go lower. It is very dependent on the type of equipment in the airplanes being used and how the approach is designed. Certain approaches have lower minimums than others. So based on the combination of those two things, that would allow the instrument approach to fore-left to be used to lower conditions. Is that good enough?
That's great, Doug. Thank you. Okay, next question is, how precise are the AEDT DNL estimates for estimates that are not close to the DNL 65 threshold? By how precise, I mean, what is the numerical value of the margin of error for these estimates? And I'll ask Veranda to answer that, please.
Thank you, Colleen. While all numerical models produce some level of error, AEDT has been designed to produce accurate results exceeding the requirements to identify noise impacts for DNL at or above 65 decibels. Where uncertainties in the models do exist, conservative assumptions are made to ensure that results do not underpredict noise exposure. Additional technical information on AEDT and how it calculates noise can be found on the FAA's website.
Okay, and that is FAA.gov. And I suspect if you go into the search box and type in AEDT, you'll probably find that location. Is that right, Rhonda?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Next question is for Donovan. Does the environmental assessment take into consideration the health issues that are experienced by people living under the current flight paths?
Okay, thank you, Colleen. So the FAA follows a detailed set of analysis procedures, which are shown in FAA Order 1050.1F, as well as the associated desk reference with that order. This includes analysis against specific thresholds, not only for aircraft noise, but also for air quality. Those thresholds represent the thresholds of potential significant impacts for those two items. The draft EA indicates that the FAA's analysis hasn't found any potential for significant impacts, both on the noise side as well as with respect to air quality from this project.
Okay, thanks. So Donovan, you mentioned a FAA order 1050.1F. That's publicly available, right? And if folks wanted to get a copy of that, how would they find that?
Absolutely. That's available on FAA.gov. You generally can just go to the FAA's homepage and search for the order, and it'll come right up, 1050.1F. And the associated desk reference is also available within that same search reference.
Next question is for Steve. Have you taken soil samples under the fore-left's pathway?
Okay, sure, I can take that. So the FAA's analysis requirements for air traffic projects doesn't require soil samples, and I wonder if this would be kind of for air quality impacts. And so part of the thought is, well, we wouldn't take it under the fore-left path because it's a proposed action. It actually hasn't been flown at all yet. So but when we're looking at air quality, we use the Aviation Environmental Design Tool that's used to calculate both air quality and noise. And so we take all this information about from a baseline year, where are the planes flying, what kind of planes are flying, everything, and load it into this model. And in that model, there are kind of for each engine, there are different, each engine kind of have a different emissions kind of, get on the right word, just like an emission signature that for each pollutant, it emits a certain amount of pollutant, and you kind of put it all together. And so we calculate what are the baseline air quality emissions using AEDT. So soil samples wouldn't be required, but at least for this project, the FAA's analysis indicated that there's no potential for significant air quality impact. And you can check the draft environmental assessment for more information. And there's also, if you're kind of looking for, if you really want to jump to what the findings of the EA were on the project website, FAABostonWorkshops.com, there's a tab called EA Findings, and it is a table that just presents, here are the findings for kind of all the different environmental categories. And one of them there is air quality. So you can see exactly what the air quality emissions were without the proposed action and with the proposed action.
Great. That's really helpful. Thanks, Steve. Next question is, how much of an increase in traffic during the baseline year would be required for my neighborhood with a DNL of about 53 to reach the important DNL 65 threshold? Sorry, Veranda, that's yours.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Changes in aircraft noise are a result of multiple factors and depend on the nature of proposed action. The noise modeling conducted for this draft environmental assessment was based on the expected changes that will result when proposed instrument approach to runway 4 left. Consideration of other scenarios, including the scenario and the question that you just provided, would require additional review outside the scope of the environmental assessment. Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks, Veranda. Okay, next question is, if this new procedure was so important, why wasn't it implemented long ago? So FAA did propose the permanent implementation of this procedure in 2015. And since that time, we've been coordinating with a variety of stakeholders, Massport, airlines, elected officials of potentially affected communities, and community advisory committees on the need for the procedure. Next question is, why have you shown no slides where you operate 4 right and 4 left simultaneously to show the adverse impact on the same community? And that one's for Rusty.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. So the environmental assessment is addressing the addition of aircraft landing on runway 4 left during bad weather. It is anticipated that this may reduce the number of aircraft using runway 4 right. Although the FAA did not prepare a slide depicting the 4 right and 4 left operating simultaneously, the noise analysis, which is described in the noise appendix to the draft environmental assessment, did incorporate simultaneous operations that occurred over the study period.
Okay, thanks. And when we say study period, let's see, who can, Steve, can you give us the dates for the study period?
See if I can pull these up. It was October 1st, 2018 through September 30th, 2019.
Miranda, does that sound right?
Actually, no, November 1st, 2018 through October 31st, 2019.
October 30th. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, 1 month off. No.
Okay, great. So,
Colleen, I would add to that just that to make sure we understand that when we run kind of the no action versus action alternative, it is taking into account all the traffic at the airport. So the no action is taking into account a full year. We look at a full year of activity at the airport, and we pull all of that data in. So it's capturing times when 4 right and 4 left are being used. And I would note that specifically for showing, so you can look at the visual of the 4 right and the 4 left, you can actually see the proposed action, the proposed RNAV procedure into 4 left on the noise visualization tool on the project website. And you can also see the existing RNAV procedure into 4 right. And you can pull both of those layers up and look at them together. And so you can visualize them there.
okay, and the data that was used during that study period is actual data, right?
Yeah.
Of actual flights.
Actual flight data that is pulled together, yes.
Okay. All right, before we get on to the next question, I'd just like to give a reminder. Questions and comments made during the workshops will not be considered as official comments on the draft environmental assessment. To make an official comment, please go to FAABostonWorkshops.com to make an online comment. Email a comment to FAABostonWorkshops@ESASSOC.com or mail it to the address on the screen. The comment period closes on November 20th. Additionally, questions asked during this workshop that are repetitive may not be answered, and we're unable to answer questions about any other topic during this workshop or if submitted as an official comment to the draft EA. Okay, back to the Q&A. Next one is for Veranda. Has the FAA made a final decision to implement the project?
Thank you, Colleen. The FAA published the draft environmental assessment, the EA, the proposed new procedure on September 21st of this year. The agency also opened a 60-day public comment period, which ends on November 20th, 2020. The FAA will consider comments it receives during the comment period. At this time, no final decision will be made until the FAA reviews and considers all comments. The FAA expects to issue a final environmental determination sometime in the year 2021. Thank you.
Okay, so basically the answer is no.
No, we have not made a final decision. We're going to consider all comments.
Okay. Next question is for Donovan. Does the EA look at geographical differences such as higher elevations that may experience noise at a much louder level? If so, how does it mitigate the noise for those people who live at higher elevations and may be suffering more?
Sure, thank you, Colleen. So we absolutely do. For the noise analysis in this project, we actually incorporate terrain data, which takes into account differences in elevation and results in differences in the propagation of noise based on that terrain. So that is taken into account. In terms of mitigation, there is no mitigation that's being done as part of this project at this time.
Because there's no significant impacts.
Because there's no significant impacts, that's correct.
Okay. Next question. Why is an environmental assessment being done instead of an environmental impact statement, sometimes also known as an EIS? And that's for Veranda.
Thank you. There are three general levels of environmental review. You have your category exclusion, your environmental assessment, and environmental impact statement, as you said, an EIS. EIS is reserved for projects that cause a significant impact. An initial environmental review was done in 2016 to determine if the category exclusion was applicable, but it was found that an environmental assessment was necessary for this project. The technical analysis in this draft environmental assessment has determined that the proposed procedure is not expected to cause a significant impact, and such an EIS or environmental impact statement is not warranted. Thank you.
Okay, next question is for Steve. Please describe how the health of wildlife is assessed during an environmental impact assessment.
Sure. Well, the health of wildlife would be different for every type of environmental assessment, depending on kind of what the project was. So at least for our project, for an air traffic project, and that's the idea, it's kind of entirely in the air. So this includes an assessment of how this proposed flight path would affect species federally listed as either threatened or endangered, as well as the habitats of the species. So you got to think about this project, the change is entirely through the air and kind of the impacts from that. And from that, it was considered that the only potential impact would be from potential bird strikes. So a bird strike is, I don't know how to politely say, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when a bird hits a plane. And it happens regularly, but it is something, thankfully, that the FAA tracks. So there is an FAA National Wildlife Strike Database that keeps a record of all reported wildlife. So that is birds and other things. If maybe something on the ground is struck, that is all tracked in this database that they have kept since 1990. That is sorted by airport, you can look at. So that database was reviewed in order to figure out if this proposed action would cause an increase in potential bird strikes. And it was determined that this proposed project would not have an effect on threatened or endangered species because of bird strikes. The number of bird strikes was very low and even lower on the proposed specifically for left. So, and you can look at more information about that analysis with very precise numbers in section 4.3 of the draft environmental assessment.
Okay, and we can find that on FAABostonWorkshops.com.
Yes.
Okay, next question for Donovan. What does DNL stand for?
Sure, thanks, Colleen. So DNL stands for Day-Night Average Sound Level. It's the noise metric that is required to be used by the FAA for National Environmental Policy or NEPA studies. DNL includes the cumulative noise generated by multiple aircraft operations, and it also includes an additional weighting for operations that occur at night. Night in this context being defined as 10 p.m. To 6:59 a.m. And what that does is it actually accounts for the increased sensitivity of communities to aircraft noise that occurs at night and the increased annoyance to those same communities. Multiple reviews have found DNL to be the best predictor of community annoyance, and the FAA continues to use it as its gold standard metric.
Okay, thank you. Next question for Rusty. Are you putting in these procedures so the airlines can operate more flights?
Colleen, thank you. So this proposed procedure will not increase the capacity at the airport. However, it will enable air traffic controllers to better manage air traffic on bad weather days. We designed the procedure to allow flights to safely and more efficiently arrive at and depart from airports. They are not designed to accommodate a higher number of flights. The FAA is not responsible for the demands of the market when it comes to how many planes there are. Our job is to safely manage the system as a whole. We are balancing the needs of multiple users and stakeholders, which includes airports and communities, as we implement this important procedure for Boston.
Okay, thank you, Rusty. Next question is for Veranda. When and how did the procedure originate?
The FAA proposed a permanent implementation of procedure back in 2015. Since that date, the agency has been coordinating with Massport, airlines, elected officials of potentially affected communities, and the community advisory committees as well on the need for the procedure. Initial environmental reviews indicate the proposed procedure will not result in a reportable or significant noise impacts over noise-sensitive areas, such as parks. In September 2019, the agency contracted with a consultant to develop an environmental assessment for this proposed procedure.
Okay, next question. What is the purpose of the proposed new procedure and who will benefit? And I'll ask Donovan to take that one, please.
Sure, thank you, Colleen. So implementing the Runway 4 Left RNAV GPS approach procedure is critical for flight safety at the airport. It'll enable pilots to land on the runway in bad weather, and it'll make both the airport as well as the national airspace system as a whole much more efficient. The proposed new procedure will follow closely existing flight tracks, as well as enabling pilots and ATC to guide aircraft to land on Runway 4 Left using the latest available technology. Runway 4 Left at Boston is one of the few examples of a major runway at a large international airport that does not have an instrument approach procedure available currently. So under current conditions at the airport, aircraft can only use a visual approach to Runway 4 Left. This will add additional safety margin for the procedure at the airport.
Okay, and I just want to add a little bit to that. So when we talk about making this runway available during bad weather conditions, so the result of that will mean that we potentially reduce delays and potentially reduce canceled flights, so that we can have that increased capacity to land aircraft during bad weather conditions on runway 4 left, which will reduce late night arrivals, which currently can extend into late night and actually early morning hours in bad weather. So being able to pull those flights in earlier in the day will reduce the number of arrivals at night, early morning, and then reduce the noise as well during those sensitive overnight hours.
And to add one other thing to that, Colleen, delays at Boston also have rippling effects system-wide as well. So this will also help alleviate some of those delays throughout the entire system.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I've heard, so Boston is considered part of the Northeast Corridor, which also includes airports down in New York, and has a significant, delays in that whole corridor have a significant impact across the whole United States as well. So thanks for adding that, Donovan. Okay, next question is for Steve. And I'm concerned about the impact to historic properties in my community. Can you tell me more about the assessment of impacts to historic sites?
Sure thing. So as part of our historic analysis, we did an inventory of historic sites throughout the entire general study area, looking at both national, state, and local sites that were identified as being potentially historic. And given that it's the Boston area, over 70,000 historic properties were identified. And so for each one of those historic properties, we then assessed for impacts by overflights and also noise impacts by the proposed procedure. So this analysis determined that the proposed action would not introduce overflights to any historic property that is not already overflown by aircraft. I mean, that's because at least the area where we're adding this procedure is already, the airflow there is already very dense. It's already overflown by a lot of aircraft. And for the noise analysis, the maximum change at a historic resource in the general study area was just 0.1 dB DNL. And for context, the kind of levels of impact for DNL noise are above 65, the 1.5 dB DNL increase, 60 to 65, 3 dB increase, and 45 to 65 dB increase. So we're talking about an order of magnitude below those.
Okay, and if somebody wanted to find a specific historic property, there's a couple different ways to go about that. Can you help us?
Sure thing. There is a very long table in the actual appendix of the draft environmental assessment. You can look it up there, but there's also the noise visualization tool on the project website. I'll say it again, FAABostonWorkshops.com. And on the noise visualization tab, it shows the noise. It shows multiple layers of noise results. So you can see the noise results from the noise analysis that is done at census blocks across the general study area. You can identify the parks done as part of the Section 4F analysis and the noise impact at each of those parks. And lastly, and the one that pertains to this question, is you can actually look at all those over 70,000 historic properties. They are actually all mapped, as well as the calculated noise values, both for the baseline and the alternative noise exposure. And just to make sure it's clear what that is, the baseline noise exposure is the noise exposure without the proposed procedure, and then the alternative noise exposure is the noise level with the proposed new procedure.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. Next question is for Rusty. Were test flights conducted to verify noise modeling results?
Colleen, thank you. So the flight checks that are performed are used to verify the design of the procedure and to ensure the airplanes and ensure that airplanes are able to fly the procedure as designed. Flight checks are like the FAA's quality control check prior to publishing the procedure. Noise modeling is not conducted during the flight check, as noise modeling is part of the National Environmental Policy Act review process because there are many variables such as wind temperature and other factors that could affect the performance of a specific aircraft and the associated noise. The noise modeling tool takes into account numerous variables when determining noise impacts, and thus is more reliable than a handful of any sort of noise monitoring that is done.
Okay, thanks, Rusty. So when we talk about test flights, we do flight checks. And as you said, those are done prior to publishing the procedure. So we can conclude then that those have not been done yet, right?
Colleen, that's correct. The flight checks will be done when the procedure is approved and prior to us actually using them.
Okay, next question. Do you measure the noise? Are the noise monitors out there in neighborhoods? Did you use those to calculate the noise levels? And we'll give that one to Donovan, please.
Sure. Thank you, Colleen. So to calculate the impacts of this proposed procedure, we are required to utilize noise modeling as opposed to direct noise measurements on the ground. Noise modeling allows the FAA to estimate noise levels over a wide geographic area. Noise measurements, on the other hand, would only allow targeted measurements of noise, which is not practical for an air traffic project of this type. So noise monitors were not used to estimate noise for this study.
Okay, next question is for Rusty. What's wrong with the way things are being done now? Why do we need to make any changes to the current flights around the airport?
Thank you, Colleen. So as we've said, I think several times, currently runway 4 left does not have a published instrument approach procedure, which restricts landing on that runway during periods of bad weather. By implementing the RNAV runway 4 left procedure, it will allow aircraft to land on runway 4 left during periods of bad weather and reduce nighttime delays to Boston.
Okay, and if I could just add to that, I kind of look at it as if you're looking at the highway system or the roads, you know, it's not something that's static. FAA continually looks for improvements. While we have a safe system, we are continually reaching to consider additional safety improvements that can make the operations that much more safe and that much more efficient. So it's air traffic and procedures are not static, and they change over time for a variety of reasons, with safety being right there at the top of the list. Okay, so let's see. Before we get on to the next question, I just want to do a reminder that questions and comments made during the workshops will not be considered as official comments on the draft environmental assessment. To make an official comment, please go to FAABostonWorkshops.com to make an online comment. Email a comment to FAA Boston Workshops at ESASSOC.com or mail it to the address on the screen. The comment period closes on November 20th. Additionally, questions asked during this workshop that are repetitive may not be answered. We're unable to answer questions about any other topic during this workshop or if submitted as an official comment to the draft EA. Okay, back to the questions. This one's for Veranda. My grandparents live right under these flight paths. They don't speak English. What translation resources are available for non-English speaking residents?
Thank you, Colleen. The FAA has reached out to non-English speaking communities, including soliciting requests for non-English assistance with this workshop. We encourage participation by all affected individuals, and your grandparents should submit comments on their request.
So we did have, I would say, a couple requests for some translation. And prior to the public workshops, we did do a translation for a flyer for these workshops. And then also, if you check out the website, FAABostonWorkshops.com, there are select pages within that project website that have been translated.
Colleen, would you like the details of those translations that were done?
Sure, that would be great, Steve.
Sure. So select portions of the website have been translated into Spanish. There are kind of some toggle keys that kind of some important parts. And then at a request of some local elected officials, we distributed some flyers in Chinese.
Great. Thank you. Next question is for Doug. When you say bad weather days, what does that mean? Cloudy, rainy weather, really cold, nor'easter, etc.
Most pilots don't even use the term bad weather, because to us, weather is just weather. It's usually, we use the term marginal or good. We don't use good. It's like we got high ceilings or high visibility, or we have marginal conditions. And marginal means approaching the kind of minimums that we're allowed to fly to based on the types of instrument procedures that are available. So, so in the terms that we're asked, bad weather, marginal conditions are anything that affects mostly our visibility and again, the ceiling of the clouds. So if you're standing on the ground and you look up and you were able to measure how high that ceiling, the cloud deck was, that was what we would call a ceiling. And so we're talking about rain, mist, fog, low clouds, freezing fog, snow. So basically anything that affects our ability to see the runway or to land the aircraft safely. Those are considered marginal conditions. And again, that's why this instrument approach procedure is helpful. It allows us to operate the aircraft safely in more conditions than we currently can without it.
Okay, great. So today, when you operate visually on runway 4 left, could you just reiterate what are those current minimums or weather conditions that you can operate in visual conditions?
So again, this is kind of a working together scenario. Rusty and I and the people that work for Rusty in air traffic control, they have requirements based on the conditions around the airport, and so do we. And so, as we said, when the weather is 1,000, when the ceiling of the clouds is 1,000 feet or greater around the area, or the visibility is at least 3 miles, those are considered visual meteorological conditions. In order for us to accept a visual approach as a pilot, we have to be able to maintain the airport in sight, or if we have other aircraft that we are also being given vectors to make approach with, and Rusty can expound on this, but basically the air traffic controllers will ask us if we have the airport in sight or potentially another aircraft that's ahead of us in sight. And we have to be able to maintain that visual connection with those, one or both of those, in order to accept a visual approach clearance. So those are the kind of things that are important for us from the flight deck perspective.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Rusty, anything you want to add to that before we jump to the next question?
Well, thanks, Colleen. Doug covered it very well. Thank you.
Okay. All right, next question is for Steve. What is the expected number of jet aircraft that will pass over Mattapan in the first year of operation after the proposed 4 left RNAV path is implemented?
Okay, that's a unique question in that it's not kind of something, but necessarily that the draft EA looked at, but let me kind of give it as close as I can. So we reviewed and analyzed all of the aircraft operations expected to fly over multiple neighborhoods in the vicinity of Boston. As we've talked about, like kind of the baseline impact came from this year of data, the year of actual flight data. And so obviously some of those aircraft were jets or non-jets or props or other types of aircraft. And let me first just say the noise visualization tool presents the potential noise impacts from not only the existing aircraft, but also the proposed procedure. And the draft EA, so the draft EA used actual counts of flights, both jets and non-jets, over Mattapan from November 18 to October 19 to complete the modeling. Now, the proposed procedure, I think as we've talked about, is adding 359 annual flights to runway 4 up, with some of that being some of that being increases in efficiency, and some of that being aircraft that are transferred from 4 right to 4 left. Some of those aircraft will be jets and some of them will not be jets. So I would say that, what is the expected total number of jet aircraft? I don't think I would be able to just have that answer right immediately, but I would say that the total number of aircraft that are added are going to be 300, or estimated to be 359 annual ops. And a certain percentage of that will be jets, but that is not, I wouldn't be able to answer what the exact percentage of those 359 would be. Now, I would suggest, actually, if you made that as a comment on the draft EA, that is something we can look at the data that we built and actually give a more precise estimate.
Thanks for giving that one a go, Steve. Okay, next question is for Rusty. Would you explain again the path for approaches to 4 left for planes that approach from the northwest of the airport? Is that for prop planes only? And what is that part of the 4 left RNAV called?
Okay, Colleen, thank you. I'll certainly try. So aircraft approach the airport from various directions, and then they get put into a traffic pattern to be sequenced and safely separated from each other for the approach. From the northwest, the aircraft would fly a downwind opposite direction to the approach. Aircraft being turned onto the approach from the downwind can be put on the approach course no closer than 8 miles from the runway, so the flight management system can properly capture the global positioning signal, GPS, to allow the aircraft to be established on the course prior to reaching the final approach fix and intercept the vertical guidance.
Okay, that sounded a little bit jargony to me. I don't know if there's anybody else that could maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Colleen, I'll try and give it a help a little if I can as well. The downwind, as Rusty alluded to, it allows us to come from the northwest section, and then air traffic control will turn us basically 180 degrees at a point that allows us sufficient time to intercept that final approach course to the airport. As I mentioned earlier, we have these stabilized approach criteria, which is required for airline and most all operators these days, that allows us to make mandates that we get configured. And when we say configured, we mean that the landing gear is down, our flaps are in the landing position, and that we've slowed to the appropriate approach speed for landing. And we want to do that typically between around 1,500 feet, maybe down to 1,000, depending on wind conditions and other things. It gives us a window of allowance to do that. And so those are very common standards that all operators use. But as Rusty alluded to, this gives us sufficient distance to make that turn, make those configurations, and get stabilized so that we can make a safe approach to landing. Hope that's helpful too.
And just to add on one other thing, it also is for all traffic. It'll both props and jets will use that downwind transition to runway 4 left.
Great. Thanks guys for jumping in there. Not being a pilot, sometimes it's a little jargony to me, so I appreciate that additional explanation. So we'll jump to the next question. This one's for Steve. Does the EA take into consideration the health of plants and animals that live in the areas under the current flight paths?
Sure. So the environmental assessment, the category that's used to study it is titled Biological Resources Wildlife. And the EA did not look at plants specifically because there's no ground disturbance expected with this project. If it was an airport's project, maybe that maybe was a runway replacement or extension of a runway where you're kind of taking, actually digging up forest or a field, that would kind of be an example of something where there would be a ground disturbance. But the EA indicated that the proposed procedures are not expected to cause any destruction to critical habitat because we're not changing anything on the ground, although there's a slight potential for additional bird strikes as a result of the proposed procedure. Since the procedure is only expected to be used just 359 additional times annually, and bird strikes of endangered and threatened species are extremely low at Boston Logan Airport, the FAA concluded this action would have no effect on threatened or endangered species. And more details on this analysis can be found in chapter 4.3 of the draft EA.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, the next question is for Veranda. And I know it's, I've heard this one quite a few times. So will our comments affect the environmental determination?
Thank you, Colleen. As part of the environmental review process, the FAA solicits comments to make an informed decision. All official comments will be considered and addressed in the final EA. Maybe there's something we should have studied as part of the environmental study, and a public comment is able to highlight that. Public comments have helped the FAA in previous environmental reviews in making sound and informed environmental decisions. So yes, all comments are considered, and we consider all comments during the comment period. Thank you.
So encourage people to please submit comments, official comments, and in a couple minutes, we'll show that slide again and give you the different ways to do that.
Yes.
Okay, next question is for Steve. Historic properties that already have overflights can then have more overflights added? Did I hear this correctly?
Let me clarify. So when you're looking at the impact on historic properties, the FAA, one thing it looks at is the changes in overflights affect noise levels at specific thresholds. For example, an increase in noise levels of 1.5 dB at or above DNL 65 will constitute a significant noise impact. Therefore, the changes in noise caused by the number of overflights in the proposed project versus the no action alternative is what the FAA uses for the noise analysis. There's also an overflight analysis where it digs into it a little more. I guess I presented it very simply, I think the first time, where it looks at kind of different areas under the proposed project and what the percentage increase in overflights would be, just because you're adding, just because there are already overflights does not mean you can necessarily just add more. So the actual document gets into kind of the very small percentage of increase in overflights, that these areas already have a large number of overflights, and the number that the proposed action would add are very low.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And we're going to jump to the reminder slide. As a reminder to everyone, questions and comments made during the workshops will not be considered as official comments on the draft environmental assessment. To make an official comment, please go to FAABostonWorkshops.com to make an online comment, email a comment to FAABostonWorkshops@ESASSOC.com, or mail it to the address on the screen. The comment period closes on November 20th. Additionally, questions asked during this workshop that are repetitive may not be answered. We're also unable to answer questions about any other topic during this workshop, or if submitted as an official comment to the draft EA. Okay, next question. Is this statement of March 4th, 2020 by the regional administrator regarding 4 left approach still correct? In quotes, when pilots are aware that they will be getting a visual approach to runway 4 left, they have the ability in their FMS to build a course in artificial glide slope if they choose. It would all depend on workload and company requirements. Close quotes. If yes, then when pilots are aware that they will be getting a visual approach to runway 4 left and have the prior JetBlue special approach in their FMS, in quotes, will they have the ability to build a course in artificial glide slope if they choose that proceeds along the course? I'm going to ask Doug. Hopefully that's clear, Doug, and you can.
Well, I will do my best to answer it. This is kind of a multi-part question, and it kind of cuts across different boundaries, but I'll do the best and try and break it down into pieces. So the first part, asking about specifically a statement made in March 4th. When pilots are aware they have the ability to build a course and a glide slope. That's very difficult to say definitively because it is very specific to the type of aircraft and the equipment on that aircraft. It is also specific to the carrier or operator and their particular operating procedures. So I can't say definitively that that is true because again, the variables are just a little too broad to be able to be that specific. But generally, it does have merit and is likely so if it's available within, again, their equipment and their company allowances, basically their operating procedures. And so then the second part, it gets a little more specific about this JetBlue special approach being in the FMS. Well, firstly, JetBlue had a procedure. They made that procedure. They paid for that procedure. So whether they shared that with other carriers, I can't comment because, again, it was custom to them and they owned it. It is possible that other carriers paid them some sort of fee to have access to it. Again, those I can't comment because those are business decisions that would be outside my realm of expertise. But with the new, if the four left instrument approach is implemented, that type of RNAV approach or area nav approach using GPS does provide what we call approved vertical guidance. So in that case, there will be a lateral path and a vertical path to follow. I hope that answers the bits and pieces of that appropriately. If not, I'll happily try again.
I just, let me just pass over the JetBlue piece to Rusty. Can you just touch on that a little bit more?
Sure, Colleen, thank you. So the JetBlue special procedure was, as Doug said, designed by JetBlue and was only intended to be used by JetBlue when it was published or when they first published the procedure. That procedure was stopped in 2014, and the FAA has not used that procedure for arrivals to Boston since that time frame. And as Doug said, if the RNAV GPS 4 left procedure is implemented, we anticipate JetBlue canceling that procedure and it will no longer be used in the future.
Great, thanks. That last part's helpful. Okay, next question. How would a person or a community get the FAA finding of no environmental impact overturned? It seems once the FAA has made this decision that the comment period is a way for people to disagree, but it has no effect on the outcome. So the FAA greatly values the impact of the input of the public, and I think Veronda just talked a bit about the importance of public comments. We consider all the comments we receive during the public comment period, and we encourage you to submit written comments on the draft EA, and we appreciate the public's participation during this workshop. And you know, I would just add that the outcome is not predetermined. We're following a process that is defined very clearly in our orders, and the public comment period is a very important part of that process. Okay, next question. Explain how this change will allow airline flights to operate more on time. And I'm going to ask either Rusty or Doug to cover that one. Whoever gets off the mute button first.
Okay. Well, I guess that's me, Colleen. So I'll attempt to answer it. And Doug, if you can chime in and help, I would appreciate it. So currently when there's bad weather at Boston and the aircraft are landing to the northeast on runway 4 right, Boston is in a single runway operation. This means that all aircraft are landing on a single runway and the arrival demand exceeds the capacity for a single runway, which causes flight delays. By implementing the RNAV runway 4 left procedure, it will allow us to utilize 2 runways during periods of bad weather, which will reduce delays.
Nicely explained, Rusty. I can't really think of anything I can add that would make it more clear.
Okay, next question. When is this procedure scheduled to be used at the airport? And I'll ask Veranda to take that one, please.
Thank you, Colleen. It is expected the procedure will start to be used in mid to late 2021 at the earliest, but the results of the environmental assessment may cause changes to that estimate.
Okay, next question is, does the FAA consider the impacts on people living on the ground under the flight paths? And, you know, I'd like to take the answer to that question back to the purpose of NEPA. NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, is for the government to study the potential impacts of federal actions on the environment, which includes the people under the proposed flight path. For the proposed instrument approach to runway 4 left, the environmental assessment identifies the affected environment in Chapter 3 and the environmental consequences of the proposed action in Chapter 4. So by completing the EA and collecting official comments from the public, the FAA is able to analyze and disclose potential impacts and make an informed environmental determination. So in addition to complying with NEPA, the FAA conducts and funds extensive research on aircraft noise and its impacts on people living under flight paths. More information on this research is available on our website, faa.gov. Simply search under the keyword noise. So that's a great reminder. FAA.gov contains a significant amount of information, particularly around the environmental area. Noise, just put it in the search bar at the top of the page and we'll take you to a really great, recently updated resource, as well as there's additional environmental information there. So the next question is for Donovan. The downward transition doesn't look concentrated like the path for planes approaching from the south. Are there waypoints for the downward transition? And does that leg of the 4 left RNAV require visual weather conditions?
Okay, great. Thank you, Colleen. Great question. So the downwind transition is actually not part of the RNAV procedure. Essentially, before the aircraft actually make it to a published portion of the procedure, they're generally vectored by ATC, and vectors are just defined as ATC actually directing the aircraft in the direction that it needs to fly to get to the next published point of the procedure. So that leg of the 4 left RNAV procedure does not require visual weather conditions. Rather, ATC will be handling separation requirements for the flight at that point prior to entering the published part of the procedure.
Okay, Rusty, anything you want to add to that one? No. Okay. All right, next question goes to Rusty. And I mentioned a little bit earlier about Northeast Corridor. And so this question is related to that. Will this change help flights that come into or out of airports like New York City?
So Colleen, all airports have different operations and flight schedules. This procedure will reduce delays during bad weather conditions for Boston Logan Airport. And by that, yes, there will be benefits for aircraft that are trying to get to the Boston Logan Airport because they might not have as great of delay as they had in the past. And just bear with me just for 1 minute. So the implementation of this procedure, Colleen, would allow us to operate more efficiently. We would be able to land more aircraft than we have or we can under the existing configuration, which will make it more efficient. We will be able to reduce delays that should have benefits where flights will be able to get into Boston earlier in the evening, and it should help us avoid later night delays that we currently have.
Okay, so the question was specifically, around New York City. I don't think that there's anything particular to New York City when you talk about reducing delays and being able to get flights in to Boston earlier in the night. That would apply to any aircraft coming from any.
That's true, Colleen. Any aircraft, any airport, it wouldn't be singled out just for New York City flights.
Okay.
And Colleen, I think to some extent it's a circumstantial question. I mean, if a plane happens to be departing a New York City airport for Boston, obviously it may have a positive effect. But again, that's very circumstantial to the particular flight. And I don't know if that really, this question isn't quite about that. So.
Right. And just to add to what Doug is saying, the biggest benefit is systemic. I mean, being able to basically not have to have as many delays during times of poor weather frees up, the ability for capacity throughout the system, en route, everywhere, to you basically have a little bit more capacity, and you can push those flights through a little bit earlier, and thus decrease the number of flights that are landing late throughout the system.
Okay, we've come pretty close to the end of our session tonight. We have one last question. Do airplanes have emission controls like cars do? If not, why not? Does the FAA look at past studies that have been done on the impact of microparticulates on a person's health? So I'll attempt to answer that one. We are very much actively involved in working with aircraft and engine manufacturers to help develop technologies that reduce aircraft emissions. So as a direct result, the public experiences reductions in air pollutants as new aircraft enter the fleet and old aircraft are retired. And this has included standards for non-volatile microparticulates. So when the question is, do airplanes have emission controls like cars do? I guess I wouldn't say they have catalytic converters or whatever cars have these days, but there are absolutely controls on emissions within the aircraft engines and requirements and specifications that all of the engine manufacturers need to meet. So certainly newer engines are better, and that research work continues to try to improve that area of focus. So with that, I'm going to close our session today. And I want to personally thank you all for joining us for today's virtual workshops. We hope that you found the information presented informative and instructive as to your understanding of the proposed procedure and the draft environmental assessment. If you'd like to watch this workshop again, or you know people in your community who were unable to attend but wanted to, the workshop has been recorded and will be posted on FAABostonWorkshops.com and the FAA's YouTube page. If you'd like to make an official comment on the draft environmental assessment, please go to FAABostonWorkshops.com to make an online comment. Email a comment to FAA Boston Workshops at ESASSOC.com or mail it to the address on the screen. The comment period closes on November 20th. Thank you very much for attending this virtual public workshop for the draft environmental assessment of the proposed RNAV GPS approach procedure at Boston Logan International Airport.